Have you ever felt frozen not because of winter, but because your heart simply refused to move on? You wake up every day carrying old pain, pretending it doesn't exist, yet it quietly shapes everything you do. I know that feeling. I lived through it during my first winter in Denmark. But that season something changed. I learned that forgiveness isn't about the person who hurt you, it's about freeing the one who's still suffering you. The coldest winter in my heart. They say Denmark is one of the happiest countries in the world. But that winter it felt like the saddest place on earth. The streets were covered in white, yet my heart felt heavy and gray. I had just moved here, far from everything familiar, carrying invisible luggage, memories of a relationship that ended badly. Every gust of icy wind seemed to whisper the same question. Why can't you just let go? I remember standing by the frozen lake near my small apartment in Aarhus. The silence was so loud it hurt. People passed by, smiling under thick scarves while I stood still, replaying old conversations, old arguments. My English playlist kept looping the same comforting voices. Podcasts, slow-spoken stories, soft accents that somehow made me feel less alone. I didn't realize it then, but I was using English not just to learn but to survive. When you're far from home, language becomes your anchor. But mine was shaking. I could talk about the weather, about my studies, about Danish culture. But I couldn't talk about the real storm inside me. I felt trapped in two kinds of silence, one outside from the snow, the other inside my own chest. Science says that emotional pain activates the same brain regions as physical pain. That's why heartbreak literally hurts. Your brain can't tell the difference between a broken bone and a broken promise. And if you keep replaying the story, your nervous system keeps thinking the danger isn't over yet. So it keeps you on alert, tense, cold, even when the world around you is safe. One night, as I was practicing English listening with a video titled, How to Heal by Letting Go, something clicked. The speaker said, "Forgiveness is not saying it was okay. It's saying I deserve peace more than I deserve revenge." I paused the video and stared out the window. Snowflakes were falling slowly, like time had decided to move in slow motion just for me. That sentence hit like truth finally spoken aloud, that I realized I'd been waiting for an apology that would never come, waiting for someone else to fix what they broke. But forgiveness, I started to see, was not about him. It was about reclaiming my own power. And that's how my journey began, not toward perfect English, not toward a perfect life, but toward understanding what it really means to forgive. The stranger in the mirror. Have you ever looked in the mirror and felt like a stranger was staring back at you? That was me every morning during that Danish winter. My reflection looked fine, scarf, gloves, the fake smile I'd mastered so no one would ask questions. But behind my eyes was a tiredness I couldn't translate into any language. It wasn't just about him. It was about the version of me I had lost in that relationship. I remember brushing my teeth one morning, watching my reflection and thinking, who are you now? It wasn't self-pity, it was confusion. The confident person who used to laugh easily had vanished. What remained was someone rehearsing conversations in English just to distract herself from the silence inside. Ironically, I was improving my English fluency while losing fluency in my own emotions. There's a strange thing about pain. The more you try to hide it, the more it shows up in other ways. I started forgetting simple words, losing focus, zoning out mid-sentence. My Danish classmates thought I was shy. In truth, my brain was busy surviving. Studies show that emotional stress drains working memory and lowers language retention, because your mind is too busy fighting ghosts to learn new sounds. My ghost had his name. Sometimes I would record myself reading slow English passages, calm, clear, soft, as if speaking gently to someone who was hurting. But really, I was speaking to me. I didn't realize that at first. I just knew that saying words like "it's okay" or "you are enough" out loud helped me breathe again. Language became my therapy. Every repeated phrase was like a small patch healing a broken piece inside. And yet, forgiveness still felt impossible. Every time I thought of him, I'd hear my own voice saying, "Don't forget what he did." That was my defense system, my brain's way of keeping me safe. But safe from what? He wasn't even there anymore. The only one I kept hurting was myself. That morning, I finally whispered something new into the mirror. Maybe forgiveness isn't for him. My voice trembled in English of all languages. Sounded strange, foreign, yet freeing. That was the first time I heard myself again. Not as a stranger, but as someone trying to come home. When English became my escape, I started innocently, a podcast here, a YouTube channel there. I told myself I was just practicing English, improving my listening skills. But deep down, I was using English as a hiding place. Each word, each phrase felt like a small step away from my pain. A different world where the hurt couldn't reach me at first. It was purely mechanical. I'd wake up, make coffee, and listen to slow English stories while the Danish sky stayed gray for hours. I repeated every sentence out loud, carefully shaping the sounds, copying the rhythm. But over time, something shifted. I wasn't just listening to those stories. I was living through them. Each sentence gave me a sense of movement, a rhythm when my days had lost theirs. Learning a new language can trick your brain. It gives you the illusion of progress when everything else feels stuck. And sometimes that illusion saves you. I didn't have the courage to talk about my heartbreak in my native language. It was too raw, too close. But in English, I could describe it softly, safely. Words like sadness, forgiveness, healing. They became bridges between my pain and my peace. There's science behind this too. Psychologists call it emotional distancing through language. When you speak about trauma in a second language, your brain processes it with less emotional intensity. It's like putting on gloves before touching something sharp. You can finally handle it without bleeding again. That's what English became for me. My emotional gloves. Some evenings I would sit by the window watching snow drift past the glass, whispering English sentences to myself. I'm learning. I'm trying. I'm okay. The words were simple, but they carried weight. And slowly, I started to believe them. It's strange. The more I practiced English, the more fluent I became in expressing kindness to myself. Every mistake, every mispronounced word, felt less like failure and more like proof that growth is messy. In language and in life, I realized that maybe learning English wasn't about grammar or accent. It was about learning how to speak again, not to impress others but to heal myself. And that's when Denmark started to feel less like exile, and more like a quiet classroom, where winter was my teacher and forgiveness was the lesson waiting to begin. The Danish Silence. If you've ever lived in Denmark, you know the silence here feels different. It's not awkward, it's sacred. The buses glide quietly. People speak softly. Even the wind seems polite. But that winter, the silence wasn't comforting. It was deafening. It gave me too much space to think. Too much time to remember. I'd walk through the narrow streets of Aarhus, surrounded by Christmas lights, and feel completely alone. Everyone seemed so calm, so self-contained. Like they were born knowing how to handle solitude. I wasn't. Where I came from, noise was comfort. Talking was healing. But here the quiet felt like an X-ray, showing me everything I'd been avoiding. One evening, after another long day of pretending I was fine, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of hot chocolate and realized how loud my own thoughts had become. I kept replaying the same old movie. His voice, our last fight, the things I wished I'd said. It was exhausting. Silence had become my prison. That's when I learned something fascinating. The human brain hates unfinished stories. Neuroscientists call it the Zeigarnik effect. When something ends without closure, like a breakup, a betrayal, a goodbye with no explanation, your brain keeps reopening the file, trying to finish it. That's why we replay conversations at 3 a.m., why we stalk old photos, why we can't move on. Our minds crave resolution, even if it hurts. The Danish Silence, in its strange way, forced me to confront that loop. Without distractions, I had nowhere to hide from my own mind. So I did something new. I started writing. Not essays or diaries, just single English sentences on sticky notes. Sentences like, "You did your best," or "It's okay to let go." I stuck them on my mirror, my fridge, even my laptop. At first it felt silly. But after a few weeks, those notes became my companions. They turned the silence from a prison into a classroom. I began to see that silence isn't empty. It's full of answers waiting to be heard. One cold Sunday morning, I stood by the window watching snow fall over the quiet city and thought, maybe silence isn't punishment. Maybe it's permission to stop running and start listening, not to him, but to myself. And that realization, though quiet, was the loudest sound of healing I'd ever heard. The science of holding grudges. Here's a strange truth your brain doesn't want you to know. When you hold a grudge, it thinks it's keeping you safe. It's like your nervous system saying, "Don't relax yet. The threat might come back." That's why even years after someone hurts you, one small reminder can send your heartbeat racing again. Your body remembers what your mind tries to forget. I learned this the hard way. One afternoon I was in a cafe in Aarhus, practicing English pronunciation. The cafe played an old song, one he used to like. Suddenly my stomach tightened, my chest felt heavy, and I forgot how to breathe properly. It was ridiculous. He wasn't there, but my body acted like he was. That's when I realized forgiveness wasn't just emotional, it was biological. According to neuroscientists, when we hold on to resentment, our stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, stay elevated. The body literally stays in fight or flight mode. It's like living with an invisible enemy inside you. Over time, that stress eats away at sleep, focus, and even language learning. No wonder I couldn't remember new words back then. My brain was busy surviving, not growing. But here's the beautiful flip side. Forgiveness changes your chemistry. Studies show that people who actively practice forgiveness experience lower blood pressure, better concentration, and improved emotional resilience. In simple English, letting go gives your brain a break. I started testing this theory in small ways. When a memory hurt, I didn't suppress it. I acknowledged it in English out loud. I'd say, "I feel angry and that's okay." Then I'd breathe deeply and remind myself, "But I'm safe now." That sentence became my reset button. Slowly, my body started to believe it. Learning to forgive is like rewiring your nervous system. It takes repetition, patience, and compassion. Just like learning English, it's messy at first. You'll stutter through emotions. You'll forget what peace feels like. But one day you'll realize you've gone hours, maybe days, without replaying the past. That's when you know the healing has begun. Not when you forget the story, but when it stops controlling your heartbeat. That winter between grammar lessons and snowstorms, I learned something science could only explain halfway. The rest I had to feel myself. Forgiveness wasn't a moral duty. It was self-care. It was science and soul shaking hands. The moment I let go, it happened on a morning so quiet it felt unreal. The world outside my Danish apartment was wrapped in white. The air was cold enough to sting, but inside something softer was beginning. I was standing by the window holding a cup of tea, watching the snow fall like tiny pieces of forgiveness drifting from the sky. And then, almost without thinking, I whispered, "I forgive you." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. No music swelled in the background. But in that silence, those 3 words cracked something open. My voice trembled, as if unsure whether it was allowed to say them. For months, I had carried the belief that forgiving him meant saying what he did was okay. But that morning, I finally understood. Forgiveness wasn't about freeing him. It was about freeing me. My body reacted instantly. A deep exhale I didn't know I'd been holding. You know that feeling after crying really hard when your body feels both empty and clean? That's what it felt like. As if my nervous system had been holding its breath all winter, waiting for this single release. I sat down and started writing again. In slow English, my comfort language. The words came naturally this time. I forgive you. I forgive myself. I'm ready to live again. Seeing them on paper made them real. Science calls this the embodiment of emotion. When you physically say or write what your heart feels, your brain starts to rewire old memories. The trauma doesn't vanish, but it loses its grip. It becomes just a story, not a cage. That day I walked outside without my headphones for the first time in weeks. No more podcasts, no more distractions. Just me, the snow, and the sound of my own footsteps. I remember smiling at a stranger. A small, genuine smile that felt new. Something about Denmark's stillness suddenly made sense. Forgiveness wasn't a grand act. It was a quiet one. It didn't need an audience. It only needed truth. As I stood under the gray sky, snowflakes landing softly on my gloves, I whispered again, this time to myself, "You're free now." And for the first time that winter, I truly believed it. The power of speaking it out loud. Here's something I didn't expect. The real healing began when I started speaking my story out loud. Until then, I'd been forgiving in silence, through journaling, thinking, or quietly reflecting. But when I began to speak, even in slow, careful English, something changed inside me. My pain finally had a voice, and when it did, it stopped screaming in my head. That I began small. I recorded myself talking about my journey, not for anyone else, just for me. I'd sit at my little kitchen table, hit record and say, "This winter I learned how to forgive." The first few times my voice cracked. I stumbled on words like betrayal, anger, and forgiveness. But each time I repeated them, the emotional charge faded a bit. My pronunciation improved, but more importantly, my heart softened. There's a psychological reason for that. When you verbalize pain, the brain shifts activity from the amygdala, the part responsible for emotional overwhelm, to the prefrontal cortex, where logic and language live. In plain English, talking about your pain literally moves it from your heart to your head. And that's how you start to regain control. So I made speaking part of my daily routine. Every morning after brushing my teeth, I'd look in the mirror and talk to myself in English. I'd say things like, "You're healing. You're learning. You did nothing wrong." It sounded strange at first, but over time it became my new internal dialogue. I even practiced telling my story to friends from my English class. Slowly, I noticed something magical. When I spoke gently about my past, people leaned in, not out of pity but connection. They saw themselves in my story. One classmate said, "Your voice is calm when you say forgive. It sounds peaceful." That moment felt like proof that my healing was real, not imagined. That's when I understood. Forgiveness grows when shared. When we speak it aloud, we pass it on. Our words carry energy, soft, invisible, but powerful enough to change not just us, but anyone who hears them. So I kept speaking. Clearly, slowly, with honesty. My English improved, yes. But more importantly, my soul became fluent in peace. That's the real power of language. It doesn't just teach you how to talk to the world. It teaches you how to talk to yourself with kindness. The freedom after forgiveness. The last snow of that Danish winter melted slowly, like the last traces of anger inside me. One morning, I walked down to the lake where I had once stood frozen with pain. The ice was gone now. The water moved freely again, calm and bright under a pale sun. And that's exactly how I felt. Not perfect, not completely healed, but moving again. I used to think forgiveness was a finish line, a final act of strength. But it isn't. It's a quiet choice you keep making. Every day, every moment. Some days I still felt the old ache, but it no longer owned me. It was just background noise, like distant church bells on a calm Sunday morning. Forgiveness didn't erase the past. It just stopped defining the present. I no longer needed him to apologize. I no longer needed to win the story. I finally realized, peace is not something you get from someone. It's something you give to yourself. I also noticed how different my English practice felt. My voice sounded lighter. My words came more easily, as if my throat was no longer carrying invisible stones. When you let go of bitterness, even your language changes, the tone, the rhythm, the warmth. You start speaking like someone who believes in tomorrow again. One evening, I recorded my final reflection for that season. I said, "The winter I learned to forgive wasn't cold after all. It was the season my heart thawed." That sentence felt like closing a chapter. Not with sadness but gratitude. Denmark had taught me silence, patience, and the beautiful truth that healing can sound like a whisper, not a scream. So if you're listening to this, and you're still carrying that heavy name in your chest, the one you can't forgive. Remember this. You don't have to do it for them. You do it for you. Because your heart deserves warmth again. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about finally being free enough to live, to learn, and to love again. Even if it starts with just a few simple words spoken softly into the winter air.